Hey, Dan Hunt here with Meraki Performance. We're back with the third episode of Heads or Tails. So this is a podcast in collaboration with CatchMark SportsNet, where we dive into both sides of program development mentally as it relates to individual athletes, and also we say heads, the individual athletes, their mindset, their beliefs, their attitudes, but then also how that aligns collectively as a whole with the team, right? And so their shared mentality, their shared beliefs, their alignment in the direction they're trying to go. And so Meraki Performance, we've really stepped into the gap and said, hey, how can we support programs and help athletic programs really develop that side? We know that coaches and athletes and leaders within teams, they're striving and doing everything they can to be the best they can be. But this is something that there's not a lot of resources out there. There's not a lot of support. And that's really what we try to do, from one-on-one coaching to team performance trainings to leadership seminars to keynote speaking, even an online video course library that we're beginning to develop, including hosting events. Like, we're just trying to step into this gap and say, hey, we see greatness within you. How can we support and help develop that and bring it out? So that's really what the Heads and Tails podcast, kind of the idea came about was, how can we get free resources and a support out there for coaches to say, hey, like, we're dealing with some of these things. How do we navigate them, right? And so that's why we're here. So we're going to get rolling. We're going to recap a little bit about our last episode. But before we get going, we just want to really shout out something that we're deciding to do with Meraki Performance in collaboration with Momentum Athletic Performance on March 30th, Saturday, March 30th. For any high school athlete that's going to be in West Michigan, we're going to host an event and actually have some 3-4 former college standout athletes coming in, and we're going to have them speak to these high school athletes on what does it take to play at the next level. Like, what mentality, mindset, what type of attitudes, like even sharing experiences of failures and mistakes and in tough times that they had to really filter, what we talk about, a mental filter, be able to filter through some of these experiences and continue to move forward. They're also going to share how that's impacted and helped them move forward in life and success after athletics. So there's going to be more information to come with that, but we just wanted to make sure that we get that out there. That's going to be March 30th. Go to merakiperform.com or any of our social media, and you can keep up with the details on that. So wanted to shout that out and give you guys that heads up before we really dive into today's episode. So hope you guys are doing well. We're excited again to be back. And want to just highlight last time, a little bit of recap. So last time on the podcast, we really talked through how when Meraki Performance, when we go in and consult and work with a team, how we look at each of these teams, right? And we created a simple framework, and we know that teams are really complicated and individuals are complicated as well. But we wanted to create a simple framework to begin to look at these teams, but also for you as a coach or a leader can look at your team through, all right? And so we talked about really three phases, or not really phases, but three buckets we would put, or characteristics or identifiers. And the first was a contained team, right? Some team that is really contained, they're caged. We would say that there's really no trust and really no safety, right? This team is very self-defeating. And they're the team that there's very little belief. There's no safety amongst each other. There's no trust. They're just caged. They're contained. And then we have the leash teams. These are the teams that there is some trust. There is some safety. There's some expectations. And we would say there's a few players that really have what it takes, but collectively as a team, like, we're not aligned. We're just not clicking. We're not the well-oiled machine, and we are not reaching our potential. We might see the potential. We might see that there's more in the tank, but we just aren't bringing it out, right? That's that leash team. And then there's the unleashed team. And that's the team that there's an extreme high level of trust. There's tons of safety amongst these players. And collectively, we experience more and more confidence because of our connections together and our striving for each other. And if you guys remember, we talked a little bit about that math equation, right? We talked about how that unleashed team is like the 1 + 1 = 100. The 1 + 1 equals a multiplication of like we are constantly exponentially getting greater because of all of us together. And I know that as coaches and leaders, we desire to not only develop those unleashed teams, but to coach those unleashed teams. And as athletes, we desire to play on that, And so, we challenge you to go back and talk to your leaders, talk to your coaching staff, and really begin to evaluate where do we stand as it relates to that framework. Maybe this framework can help maybe clarify a direction because clarity is what we need for performance. Maybe it clarifies the next right step, right? But we also did this. My team and I came together and we said, you know what? How do we create something where maybe the team can come and here's some of these buckets and here's some of these things that they can evaluate themselves through? And so we created a really simple, I think it's 11-question quiz on our website at merakiperform.com. If you click on the programs tab and you go down about partway through the webpage, there's a little title that says, is your team unleashed? A question, is your team unleashed? And then there's a button that says, take the quiz. Feel free to jump on there and do that. Again, it's 11 questions. It's very simple. It goes through like some of those characteristics of whether you have them or you don't and identifying at what level you do. And it kind of produces like, hey, here's where you're potentially at and here's some action steps that you can take. So I encourage anybody, if you're still wrestling with that and this is a topic of conversation, you're like, I really don't know, check out the website. Go take that quiz and see where you land, all right? So today we want to pivot a little bit. We've been talking a lot about the tails, right? The team overall together and that collective mentality and viewing a lot of what we've talked about from the mental perspective on that side of the coin. And we want to flip that today. We really want to speak to the individual athlete. We want to, share some insight and maybe some insight that coaches, maybe this will be some strategies for coaches to talk through with athletes and identify some things. So we're going to flip the coin. We're going to talk about the head side and that mindset. And what we want to dive in today is the difference between thought versus thinking. All right. And this can be really difficult to begin to talk to or talk about, but there is a clear difference. There's a clear difference between thought versus thinking. And there's a really big reason why we're diving into this and how it affects peak performance or flow. And if you think of flow or being in the zone, it's actually the state of when you're fully immersed in what you're doing and you're just everything, all your focus and energy, attention is all in that. And when you're in that, there's really no thinking taking place. They actually, a lot of sports psychologists and some research has, a lot of research essentially has backed this idea that you're actually in a state of being, right? So if you think of water being either a gas state, a liquid state, or a frozen state, you as an individual are in a state of being where there's no thinking. You're actually just fully immersed, responding and engaging in the activity. And as an athlete, when I share that, there's probably been times where you've been on the court or in the practice and you've been so immersed in the practice that the practice is over like this and you go, holy cow, where did the time go? Right? That's the state that we're trying to activate and engage, because when we are activated in that state, that's our highest place of potential. And we say with Meraki Performance, we believe greatness happens in that state. Greatness happens in the moment. And that's essentially what that state of flow is that you are fully immersed in the moment. And so it matters because there's thought versus thinking, and there's a clear difference, right? As we talked about, that state of being is a non-thinking state. That state of flow, you're no longer engaged in thinking. You're not worrying and cycling through thoughts, right? You're not thinking of the past or the scoreboard, or maybe a ref made a call or coach pulled you out of the game, or the opponent did something, or how are you going to react or respond to this opponent? Like none of that is truly taking up tons of space in your mind. There might be a thought and then it goes away, right? And so the thought is just something that pops into your mind at some point and then it quickly fades away, all right? A thought is something that we can't always control, okay? There's thoughts that pop up. We know that at times. I don't know about you, But I've had those thoughts where I'm like, whoa, don't like that one, right? We get these thoughts that pop in our head and then they go away. Thinking is a lot different, where we actually get that thought and then we begin to focus on it and focus on it and focus on it and focus on it. And when we focus on that, what we can experience is a shift in our emotional state. We shift our emotions. It could be positive in a way that, like, yes, I'm driving good emotions, and then it drives our actions and behaviors, and it could be positive, right? It also could be negative. And especially when we're thinking of past or future experiences that we did not like or we don't want to experience, that's when that thinking drives an emotion that we don't want and we actually try to run from. And then we create behaviors. We start behaving in a way that doesn't allow us to be in the moment and bring out the best. All right. And so as I share that, some of us have probably experienced the spiraling. We've heard that. And we know that somebody physically is not spiraling out of control. What's spiraling is their thinking. What's spiraling is their thought patterns, and they're spinning and spinning. And when they're spiraling, it's probably not because it's a good thought that popped up that they're thinking about. It's probably a thought that they should really remove and be able to think of something else and move forward, right? And so as we described it, I think it's really important to understand that there is a very, very, very clear difference, okay? And as I alluded to before, thoughts you can't always control, but thinking you 100% can control. You can manage your thinking. You can develop the skill of focus to shift your focus from a thought that does not bring out the best in you to a thought that does, all right? And as I share that, I want to share this insight that we share a lot with teams, is that there is a way that you can influence your thoughts. And I talk about inputs all the time. I'm very, very passionate about auditing and understanding what are the inputs that you're allowing into your life, right? And we say in athletics, we talk about it all the time, like the food we intake, the liquids we intake, like those deeply matter to what we are able to produce or the outputs. What we don't always talk about is what is the input that we're listening to? What is the input that we're seeing with our eyes? What are the inputs that we're allowing into our life from other people and the conversations we are having? Because those influence us just as much and influence our performance just as much as the food we eat, just as much as the daily regimen in the workout, is the things that we allow into our mind and we begin to think about, okay? So, for example, if you are surrounding yourself with people that don't believe in you, that athletically don't believe that you can maybe play at the next level, or that you are good enough to be playing at the position you are, or when you face challenges, they're complaining about all the external circumstances around them instead of focusing on what they can do, you begin to view things from that lens. You begin to allow those inputs in. And so when tough times happen, and because they do, right? We, instead of going, who am I and what can I do and what can I control, we go to these other inputs, and that ends up being the thought of, oh man, if coach wouldn't have put that guy in with me, I would have been, if coach would have put me on the other side with the starters, I would get a better chance to be a starter, right? If that ref wouldn't have made that bad call, then we would have won the game. Or if coach wouldn't have yelled at me or told me to do this, we could have done this, right? All based on that's the inputs and the influence in the conversations we might be having around us, okay? And there's other inputs. You think of, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but social media, right? What are you watching on social media? If you're somebody that gets on TikTok and you enjoy watching fight videos all the time, what do you think you're going to do when you get extremely upset and agitated? You're going to want to fight, right? Because that's the input, all right? And when you get agitated, the thought that comes to mind is, how do I clench my fists and swing them? And so you have to audit yourself and understand that although you cannot control all your thoughts, you can influence them like crazy. And that's what I want us to do. I want us to be able to go, what are the inputs that I can have in my life that are going to influence my thoughts to bring out the best in me, all right? And then the other piece of that too is being able to say, what's the internal inspiration? Really, like what I was just talking about with those inputs, I was talking about external impressions on us. We all have them. We have them in this world. There's tons of external impressions and things that are impressing into our mind and our thoughts. What is the internal inspiration? And what I mean by that is, what is the deepest desire that you truly have? What do you desire to get out of athletics? What do you desire to get out of your experience? Where do you desire to play? Do you desire to play at the next level? Do you desire to coach someday? What is it that you deeply, deeply desire? And I would say, like, believe in it, man. Believe in it, and don't be ashamed to not only speak about that, but to take massive action on that. We live in a society where we say, hey, if you have too much confidence, like you're arrogant, right? Like we put you in a box and say, don't step outside of that box. And in looking at, you see all these athletes in the greatness that they walk in and experience, like all of them stepped outside of a box. All of them did it. All of them were probably at one point like, dude, you're a tryhard. Oh man, you're just trying to impress the coach. Oh, you really think you're that good? And every single one of them said, yep, this is what's internally in me. This is the inspiration that's deep within me and that I want to rise. This is the thing that I want to chase down. And they did it over and over and over again. And they made that their center focus, right? And so I share that because we want our external impressions to reinforce that internal inspiration. We don't want them fighting each other and vying for our attention. We want them to align and maximize, right? And pushing us forward, if that makes sense, okay? And so I want you to, as we talked a little bit about thought versus thinking, another thing that we do with teams is we ask them really simply to really drive this point home. I want you to think of a time that you performed at your absolute best, that you were in the zone, you were in that state of flow, you were fully immersed in the moment, and that you performed at your best. I want you to sit in that space for a second. Reflect on that time, right? It could have been a week ago, could have been a year ago, could have been a couple days ago. I don't know. But think about that time. And now I want you to think about, how much were you thinking? If you had a speedometer that registered your thoughts, was that 100 miles an hour? Was it at 50 miles an hour? Was that zero? Like that thought speedometer, that thinking speedometer? Where was it at? I would imagine as you reflect and you're like, yeah, I don't think I thought at all. I think I was fully immersed, right? I think I was fully in that moment. I was all in, okay? And now I want to flip the side and say, think of one of your worst performances. Think of one of your absolute worst performances, especially as of late. Maybe you've had one in the last 6 months. I want you to go to that space. And I want you to think and ask yourself that same exact question. If you had that thinking speedometer, where was it at? Was that 100? Some of us would probably argue maybe even 120, 150, right? They were probably extremely, extremely fast. And when you were thinking, more than likely, you were thinking about external impressions and not the internal inspiration. You were thinking about the external circumstances and the things that were out of your control instead of the internal inspiration and what's within your control, right? And I paint that picture and try to drive that home because that is the clear difference between thought versus thinking. And we need to be able to recognize, when are those times that I'm getting into that loop and I'm focusing on things, and I need to bring myself back to that center and that inspiration. I need to bring myself back to what I can control and what I need to do with the next right step, right? We need to be able to recognize when I start spiraling down that loop, and even when I'm in situations or conversations or I'm watching things that are bringing not the best out of me, but really making me focus on things that are external and out of my control, right? We need to begin to recognize those things, because there's, again, clear difference between thought versus thinking. And if you are somebody and you're an individual that wants to get the most out of yourself, not just in athletics, but in life, this is a skill and a strength that you can develop that will help produce that. When you think of like weight training, right? It's time under tension and it's form. And when I think of time under tension, that means that you have to experience difficult times. You have to experience and be able to lean into those challenging times. And even in those challenging times, when the easy thing is to look to the external and go, yeah, but what about this? And yeah, and we can get that quick release in the vent, in the complaining. We have to be disciplined, informed, like stick to the form of, no, but who am I? No, but how do I show up here? But what's the thing that I want out of this? And if you're leading a team, it's where do we desire to go, right? And we remind ourselves and we point in that direction. And so I'm somebody that, I don't just talk about these things. I've really lived these things out. And a lot of research and things have done, like I've read tons of books and I've, dove into this space for a really long time. I also have leveraged these skills and strategies in my own life. And there was no other time than, and I'm going to share a personal story right now. There's no other time that's happened than when I was 22 years old, right? I was 22 years old. I was going to school at Ferris State University, and I think it was my junior year, just coming back from internship, feeling really confident about where I was going, the career path that I chose. But there was some really, really, really difficult things going on in my life. A lot of emotional things that were going on in my life. And long story short, I ended up developing a heart condition, a very rare heart condition called pericarditis, essentially where a virus attacked my heart, and the actual, there's a sac around your heart, was inflamed so much that it began to crush my heart. I literally, my heart was, at one point, I actually drove myself in the middle of the night after about 5 days of fighting pain and passing out, because I didn't have insurance. So I was like, I can't go to the doctors. I don't have insurance. I ended up fighting and going to the doctor, where I ended up passing out in the waiting room. They got me back. They had EKGs. My shirt was ripped off, and they said, he's going into cardiac arrest, essentially. They said they were going to air med me down to Grand Rapids. They didn't know what was going on, and it was a very, very difficult time, obviously. I spent 7 days in Meyer Heart. 7 days. They couldn't really figure out what was going on, and finally on the 5th or 6th days, they realized what happened. They still don't know why it happened, and I think, between us, I think big piece was just the emotional stress that I was under. It weakened my immune system, and my heart ended up, experiencing what it did. And so, I end up spending 7 days in Meyer Heart, and I get out of Meyer Heart, and I'm not allowed to go back to class at that time. I was in a professional tennis management program. I'm not allowed to play the sport and the career that I'm trying to go down. I actually didn't even know at the time whether or not I would be allowed to, because of the fear. The doctors were talking about potentially losing functionability within my heart, because that sac could have deteriorated some of my heart. And at that time, there was only one other person that Meyer Heart had seen in the last 5 or 6 years at that time. And that person was put on a heart transplant list, because the virus the inflamed actually damaged his heart so much. And so I couldn't go to class. I think I ended up missing almost a month and a half of the first semester. And I just, I slowly, just stayed focused and was doing my homework at home and doing what I could and trying to stay focused on the day, because there was things that I wanted to achieve. There was desires of my heart that I was striving for, and vision I had for my life. At one point in the middle of that too, I ended up getting a letter from the hospital. And because I didn't have insurance, there was almost a $400,000 bill that I was in debt. And they said, hey, you got to pay this back. And so in this season, I'm sharing this because, I don't know if you've ever been in a space like that, but it just feels like everything's amounting. Everything is piling onto you, and you go, what can I do, right? What can I do? How do I get out of this? There's so much external impression on me. And if I keep listening to it, you're just frozen, right? And I continued to remind myself in this season, and just this, you are relentless, man. You are a fighter, right? You don't ever give up, which is something that I developed in my athletic career. It's just something that I was never a great athlete. I was average at best, but I just never gave up. I had this fight, and I just stayed locked into, what does that look like today? How do you fight for today, right? At that time, I had my first son, and it was I'm trying to create a better life for him. How do I keep taking steps forward and moving in the direction so that he has a great life? And I stayed focused on those things. And I will never forget, at the end of the year, we all are at a banquet, and I was awarded a small scholarship. And the person awarding it to me said, hey, this guy, and he's done this and he's experienced this. And he made a comment and he said, I didn't think that he would come back to school and finish his degree. Like, after all these things took place in his life, I didn't think he would do this. And I remember walking up to the podium and just being moved because it was a standing ovation. And I just realized, like, it was just such a special moment. And I remember getting onto the podium and saying, like, I really didn't think I had a choice, and it wasn't like somebody was forcing me. It was, I didn't think I had a choice because I'm somebody who never gives up. The internal inspiration within me was that I'm relentless. The internal inspiration within me was that I'm a fighter. The internal inspiration said, there's so much more that you desire out of life, and this is part of the pathway, and you need to keep moving forward. So much inside of me said, this is happening for you, and how do you leverage it, and how do you use it moving forward, right? And I share this story with you not to pat myself on the back. I share this story because I think that there's young athletes that have experienced life and things in their life just like this that feel like it's amounting, and they're not listening to the internal inspiration of who they are and where they're trying to go. And if you're a coach out there, like, you are in the prime position to say, hey man, who are you? You are a part of this. Who are we? Where are we going? And to have those conversations, to lean into that, to be that person alongside of them to help them. I could have never gotten here through that experience without the support that I had of my family and friends. Like, they were constantly reminding me of those things. In which we have to do, and this is my challenge today as we wrap up, because I want to respect everybody's time, but you have to recognize, when are you in that thought loop that's externally driven? When are you in that thinking, that not even negative, that performance diminishing thinking that is focused on external impressions in your life and not your internal inspiration? And when you recognize that, that's the first step. So many of us go through life not looking and seeking and recognizing that. And as soon as we recognize that, that is the first step. Because once we recognize that, then we can disrupt it and destroy it and remove it. And when we remove it, there's space to create a new thought, right? It's space to create a new thinking loop, a performance-enhancing thinking loop, something to drive us back to our internal inspiration, creating a mental filter that when life experiences take place, we don't look at them and put value in them. We look at ourselves and put value in who we are and what we're going to do and how we're going to leverage and use those things, all right? So we need to be able to recognize. So coaches, let's have some conversations with these athletes. Athletes, if you're listening to this, you're like, man, I've experienced some of this. Have the conversation with your parents. Have this conversation with your friends. Have this conversation with your teammates or your coaches. Begin to recognize when we get into those negative spaces, those performance diminishing spaces with our thoughts, and start disrupting them, start removing them. Identify when we're listening to the external impression and be able to learn to listen into that internal inspiration and be able to take actions based on that. Okay? Every day. And if you've been around me long enough, you know that I say discipline creates distance. And that season of life for me was all about creating distance. It was one day at a time. At times, it was one moment at a time. And there was so much doubt, and there was so much fear, and there was tears, and there was frustration. But you know what? I leaned into it, and I reminded myself in that, who am I, and what do I desire out of life, and what's the next right step based on that inspiration, that desire, all right? So as we're wrapping up today, appreciate your guys' time. It was, as you can see, like, I'm really passionate about this. I believe deeply, deeply, deeply that greatness is within you. And when we focus on the right things, that we can bring that greatness out. All right. And so as we close up today, I just want to ask, like, if you enjoyed this, if you like this podcast, if this was helpful to you, please subscribe, rate, review, share with people. All right. And if you want to know more, just check us out at Meraki Perform on all social medias. That's Meraki Perform on all social medias. Or you can catch, myself at Coach D Hunt on social media as well. Coaches, if you want to further this conversation, following this episode every Monday, the Monday following an episode, we host a Heads or Tails Coaches Meetup. And that Coaches Meetup is going to be at Northside Sports Page Grill on Holt and Whitehall Road. Okay, that's going to be February 19th at 5:30. You can show up. We further this conversation and we navigate and begin to talk about the real things that you're experiencing. Maybe it's some of this, maybe it's other things, and we lean and we stand in that gap and try to really support you in that. Again, we appreciate your time. Grateful for everybody that jumped on here and listened. And if you're listening later, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can check us out at MerakiPerform.com. You can stay up to date with all of our newsletters and events and things like that. We'd love to connect with you. So appreciate your guys' time today, and greatness is within.